Welcome to the New Monastics Podcast, where we'll be discussing all aspects of the contemplative life and interspirituality in the context of modernity. On each episode, we will choose a topic to explore with one of today's leading teachers or thinkers. The New Monastics Podcast is a project of Charis Foundation for New Monasticism and Interspirituality, which is dedicated to the emergence of a newly conceived contemplative life of embodied spirituality and sacred activism. Welcome to the New Monastics Podcast. I'm Nathaniel Miles Yepes, your host and a dialogue partner for our guests.
And I'm Daniel, your other host and interviewer.
Today we have my friend and colleague, Brenda Salgado, a Nicaraguan-American curandera and Toltec healer, who emphasizes ceremony and traditional circle work for healing conflict and building community. She is the former director of the East Bay Meditation Center and the founder of Nepantla Healing and Consulting. She's also the author of Real World Mindfulness for Beginners.
So it's so wonderful to have you, Brenda. Thank you for joining us.
I'm very happy to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
I just wanted to start by saying at my college graduation at Naropa University, you were actually the commencement speaker. And from that day, there's really only one thing that stuck with me, and it was actually a story that you told about a sage plant. And I'm wondering if you can open up this dialogue by sharing that story, if you'd be willing.
Well, I'd be honored to. It's a story that stayed with me a very long time from one of my teachers. Many, many years ago, I went to the Festival of Traditional Medicine in Mexico to begin my path as a medicine person and healer. And one of the teachers there, Brian, was talking a lot about the medicine of the plants in the area. And he walked us over to this beautiful sage plant. And he spoke about the fact that he has had relationships with many sage plants for decades. And that it's important as you walk on this path to have deep respect and relationship with plants. He spoke about one sage plant that he had known for several decades. And that not only did he harvest medicine from it, he would be very careful to ask permission and to ask the plant also for its advice about how to work with the people they were healing. So the plant over many decades gave him a lot of sage and good advice about how to support other people on the healing path. Pun intended. And one day he was taught by his elders to only take what you need, to be very respectful, to ask permission of the plant, to see them as our teachers and our elders. And one day he went to this sage plant that he had known for so long, and someone had over-harvested the plant to the point of killing it, and he was devastated. And he said he wept at the sight of that plant for many hours. And he said, I need you to understand I wasn't crying because someone killed the plant that I harvest from. It felt like someone had murdered my teacher, my elder, my friend. And he said, this is the type of relationship you have to have with our non-human relations, with the plant world, if you're going to carry this medicine to walk in a respectful and good way. And so, I always share that story when I'm teaching medicine because it's so important to be in the right energy and relationship with those beings.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that with everyone.
Mm-hmm.
It's been a very impactful story for me and something that I've returned to in my own thoughts often. So thank you for telling it originally, and thank you again. And Nathaniel, would you like to just share a little bit with us where you're hoping to go in terms of dialoguing with Brenda today?
Yeah, absolutely. I hadn't remembered that story, and that's so important for all of us with regard to spiritual practice, because there's something about a modern mentality that is so abstract and separates us from direct relationship. And so we often end up, even without meaning to, talking about. And even when we do our practices, no matter what the tradition, sometimes there's a sense that we're not doing something real. That we're not in direct relationship with what we're doing. And it actually takes some sort of effort to come back into this direct relationship. Like what I'm doing matters, because there's so much of doing practice for me and not as much sense of doing practice with the environment, in an environment, and it is speaking and you're speaking. And so that story really touches me. And interestingly, I was also at that commencement address that you gave, and I was faculty then, and that was the first time I saw you. And I kind of really relished the fact that while the the bio for you in the commencement brochure was all about your Buddhist connections, which seemed relevant to people at a Buddhist-inspired university. We say at Naropa University that we're a Buddhist-inspired university. We're not a Buddhist university, but we did have a Buddhist founder, and so there's a lot of that culture there. And so it seemed very relevant to have you speak, with all this Buddhist bio that was in there. And then you said nothing about Buddhism. and I just relished that. It was so clear that what you were talking about was coming from the moment and was on point for then, and was really speaking from indigenous roots and the message that was necessary for us to hear in modernity. And so one thing that I remember, and I don't want to try to explain it, but you were talking about the eagle and the condor that day. And there was something about that seemed very relevant to this kind of interspiritual world in which we exist today, and the coming together of different kinds of consciousness. And so today we do want to talk with you about the implicit interspirituality of the indigenous world and indigenous peoples. And I wonder if you could bring in again what you were talking about that day with the eagle and the condor, and how that might be relevant to how we're engaging one another today in the planet.
I'd be happy to. I feel really grateful to have heard these stories, these sharings from others. But the prophecy of the eagle and the condor comes from South America, the indigenous peoples of South America. But it's very similar to prophecies from Native folks in other parts of the continent. And that particular prophecy talks a lot. And I remember an elder, Jerry Teo, talking to me about this. He said, prior to colonization, we were taught to fly in balance as human beings, regardless what of our gender was. He would say you were taught to cultivate both your condor wing and your eagle wing to fly in balance as a human being. And the condor wing is about the feminine, the intuition, the connection with the earth, compassion and love, and that kind of presence. And then the eagle wing, he talked about that being more of the masculine, the intellect, the doing in the physical realm. So it was about uniting these above and below realms and being present with both ways. He said, regardless of what your gender is, you were taught to fly in balance, to cultivate both of your wings and to honor both wings in your community as well. And that's important to find that balance. And the prophecy from South America, from the indigenous folks there, was that we were entering into a time about 500 years ago where people who were out of balance, who had destroyed their own condor medicine and their medicine people, were flying out of balance now with an unhealthy form of the eagle wing and had atrophied or destroyed their condor wing, that they were going to take over the earth and they were going to cause harm from that imbalance. And that for many people, indigenous peoples especially, that our medicines would have to be hidden, go underground, because it would become dangerous to practice those things. So a lot of oral tradition and hiding. It's not that we didn't have written tradition. It's that a lot of those codices were destroyed or considered evil. But they did say back then, a time is coming. After 500 years has passed, we'll be in a different part of the cosmic cycles, the cosmic calendars, and there will be an opportunity for humanity to come back into balance if we choose that together. And so he said at that time, some of this original medicine that had been hidden for so long will need to come back out to help people learn how to come back into balance for the peace and the dignity of indigenous peoples, but also for so that we remember we're in that tradition. We're talking that we're all part of one sacred hoop, all different colors of humanity, the red, the yellow, the black, white, and so many different indigenous traditions understand that. And that we have to come back into our original medicine and remember our ancestors, remember our ties with the land, our peace and our dignity, to come back together, and that these medicines would come back out to help humanity find that balance again. And that time in the calendars now, whether we're talking the Mayan calendar, the Toltec calendar, we're in this time of big shift right now, big shifts in cycles. So it's an important time to try to remember how to fly in balance again for ourselves, but also with each other as well.
That's really interesting to hear again, because in our last podcast with my friend Ramon Parrish, we were bringing up this idea from Teilhard de Chardin of convergence. And I think you heard Matthew Wright speak about this too, that we have this origin point in Africa. And we spread out, and maybe other people have different origin stories, but this origin story that we're learning from our genetic history spreads out from Africa, and there are lines of development as we spread out from this origin point. And on a round planet with limited surface area, eventually those lines of development, those lines of divergence, as he would put it, come to a convergence. We meet again. We left a place and we meet again. And that meeting again seems to be represented also in this prophecy of the condor and the eagle. And the opportunity of that moment seems really important. And there's conflict and confrontation that happens in that meeting again. And we've seen that. And now I think it's the time, and we have to take advantage of this time quickly to claim the opportunity of that convergence, I think. What is to be learned from the divergence, from the journeys, and what is to be reclaimed? Because some lines of development have gone so far that they've forgotten some things that are far back on the line. So that seems relevant here. Do you see that too?
I do. What I say to people a lot is all of our ancestors were indigenous to place at one point. And they knew how to listen to the land and the land guardians and to be in ceremony with the land and honor and respect and reverence with the land, to be stewards, not owners of land. In those original instructions, they learned those instructions in place. And then they also had a lot of ceremony, connection to ancestors. They remembered where they came from. And then I think there's, some breaking that happened of a relationship to place and where and who we come from that happened for people. And in that sense of loss, that's where some of this harm came in. When people are disconnected and unrooted in that way, they can be causers of great harm in the world. And I think that's been one of the beauties around the peace and dignity journeys and the connection to this prophecy. My understanding of the history that has been shared by Jose Malvedo and others is that back in 1990, many elders from all of the Americas, North, Central, South, gathered in South America and began to talk about their various prophecies. And this time was coming, this time of shift, this time of healing for the planet and for humanity, and the urgency of the indigenous peoples to come back into their peace, their dignity, their traditional ways in order to help shepherd that time and to help people remember. And so in 1992, they began doing this beautiful ceremony where they would have the runners running from Alaska on the Eagle route and from Argentina on the Condor route and running for 6-7 months, doing prayers, doing ceremony with each of the communities as they traveled, picking up staffs that represent the prayers for those people and for humanity. And then, converging, those two paths converging and meeting in the center. The location would change every 4 years. But carrying these prayers for healing of the planet, healing of indigenous peoples, healing of these traditional ways of this remembering for all of humanity, not just for indigenous peoples, but for everyone, that we remember how to be in right relationship, to be in good energy, to be in ceremony in good ways, and to remember some of the things that have been lost so that we can come back into wholeness as individuals, as communities, as peoples, and with all of creation, because we lost so much of that relationship. So yeah, I do think it's a very poignant and interesting time. And for those traditions that were deeply mystic and maintained their relationship to the cosmos, to astrological, movements and things like that, there's all different versions of similar prophecies of humanity and that convergence in this time and that remembering and returning home to who we truly are.
I believe these are called the peace and dignity journeys. Is that right? Mm-hmm. So as you're talking about it, I'm assuming that the runners who are carrying the staff and praying as they complete legs of this journey for, the condor, I assume, from the south and the eagle coming from the north to meet, that the runners don't represent any one tribal people or indigenous people, but multiple indigenous peoples carrying the prayers.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that because, as they pass through every community, they're receiving a staff of prayers for that community. So by the time they get to the center, they're carrying hundreds of staffs from all these indigenous tribes from across the Americas, all the way from the north to the south, from all of Abya-Yala or Turtle Island. So yeah, it is more than anyone. It's not just about carrying the prayers for your particular tribe, right? Sometimes you're carrying the staffs of other people. And I do remember My grandmother, who died when I was young, she's the ancestor who most guides me. In 2011, she said, you have to be in the Peace and Dignity Journeys in 2012. And I had never been part of it. So I can't speak as an authority in the way that Jose or others might. But in 2011, she said, I need you to contact the organizer for Nicaragua, because that's the land of your ancestors. And I need you to be there. I need you to fundraise for her. I need you to do whatever you need to do to help her. And I hadn't been in Nicaragua since I was 7 years old. I was born and raised here in California. I had gone a few times as a baby or a small child, but hadn't been again. And so that was a big deal to go there and to contact this woman and say, I know you don't know me, but ancestors tell me I have to help you. And she said, I was praying at the fire. And my grandmother told me she was going to send me someone to help me. And I said, I think your grandmother and my grandmother are talking up somewhere up there, hatching plans. But it was an interesting thing what you say about the person carrying those prayers, because I remember just going really humble, because it's like, I haven't been part of this all this time. I have been going to the fundraisers here in California and supporting in those ways, but I had never been a runner. And the message I got was to go help her, not to run, right? I didn't train for running. I didn't plan to run, And when I was there's a beautiful young man who was the leader of the Condor route, who came from a indigenous tribe in Colombia, who was selected by the council to be the leader of the Condor route. And 2 of the different days that I was there, one day he said, today you have to run. And I said, no, I'm just here to help her. And he said, no, they're telling me you have to run. So that, I was very humbled by that. And, and it's a prayer. The run is a prayer. It's not a race. With every foot you're placing on the earth, it's prayer, right? For this peace, for this dignity, for this healing. And so I'm carrying a staff, I'm like, got through that. Okay. And then when we were running another day, he said to me, oh, they're telling me you have to run, and you have to run in the front, and you have to carry the Condor staff. And I felt the weight and the responsibility of that. And I just started crying. I said, no. There's other people who've been running since South America, and they haven't had a chance to carry the Condor staff. No, I don't know what to do. And he said to me, I don't decide who carries the Condor staff. The ancestors do. I pray every morning, and I'm in this ritual, and they tell me who's supposed to run, who's supposed to carry which staff. And he said, the person who carries the Condor staff has to carry it with such a loving heart for all of humanity and, humility. And for whatever reason, because your ancestors are from here, because we're running into this particular community, they want you to carry the Condor staff, and you'll be okay. I'll tell you what to do. And I remember that particular day, going to get very emotional about this. The other day had been kind of more flat and short, and this one was longer and more uphill. So it was harder on me, and I was not in the best of health. And like I said, a lot of these runners train for months before they're going, and I certainly did not train. So I was running up the hill, and my legs were giving out, my knees were giving out, and I was really worried that I wouldn't complete this big, important task that was asked of me. And I got very frightened that I wouldn't make it. And my grandmother showed up at that time next to me, and she said, thank you for coming when I asked you to come. Thank you for being part of the ceremony, this prayer for us, for humanity. And she said, don't worry, you're never doing any of this alone. I'm going to help you up that hill. And the rest of the run was so easy because I felt like she was carrying me. And I've done a lot of ancestor ceremony here in California for sure to heal my ancestors. But there was something about being in ceremony with indigenous peoples on the land of my ancestors that forever changed my life. And I'm really grateful for that experience. But yes, whoever's holding those staffs, you can't do it from a place of ego or pride or hatred for other peoples. It has to be done in this place of wanting the peace and dignity of all the original peoples, but also all of humanity to come back into that remembrance, that remembering of who we all are as a human family.
Wonderful. Part of what's interesting to me about the peace and dignity journeys, as I've heard you describe them before, well, I'll rewind a little bit. It takes me back to a few years ago. I was co-leading a dialogue outside of Tulsa, Oklahoma at Osage Forest of Peace. And, you see from the name Osage that this was probably tribal land originally. And to this dialogue, we'd invited somebody we did not yet know, a Maori healer and grandmother Arapata. And before the dialogue started, she was contacting me and saying, on whose land are we going to be working? I want to get in touch with the elders there, in as much as they might be there and whose lands they are. And I want to ask their permission to work on their land. And she did in as much as she could. And again, we put her in touch with the right people, and she came, and there was time spent on the land speaking to the ancestors that were still present there. And then we came into dialogue, and this was, what we might call an interspiritual dialogue, a dialogue of people representing a diversity of perspectives, hoping to learn from one another, but who also have diverse perspectives internally. And that's part of the interspirituality. It's not just interreligious, but we are, already complex as individuals. So we can't even represent religions or traditions. We can just represent ourselves within them. And it became an interesting conversation with her about, do indigenous peoples have a place in these dialogues? And from one perspective, we felt, well, obviously, you're here. But there was something more was necessary. A context that felt real and true, because one thing she was saying to us, almost these terms, she says, do you want me to wear feathers? Which was a way of saying, is this a token representation, or do we really have a place at this table? And we were assuming that. And it helped us realize that, no, there's work to be done to make a person know that that's true. That it's not token representation, that we're all here coming to the table, unable to represent, and yet invited to be who we truly are and not to play this game of wearing any particular hat. And that was one interesting part of our dialogue. And, what's important about that is a lot of the work of interspirituality is about good representation, meaning doing the work of making sure we have the right people, the right diversity at the table, and then deconstructing that and knowing we could never represent our traditions. Humbly, we can just be present and give how we understand ourselves in relationship to one another and to those traditions. But then it really became clear in talking to her that there's almost an interspirituality that is being articulated within indigenous communities and among indigenous peoples around the planet. She herself was working with a number of other grandmothers of other indigenous, lineages and traditions. And it was clear they had common cause, and we know why. Colonialism and all kinds of things that have created this common cause. And so it almost began to feel like there was a pan-indigenous movement of cross-fertilization and learning and banding together, even when there wasn't cross-fertilization, but just we have common cause, so let's work together. But more and more from you and others, I've learned that there's a lot of teaching that's being passed among indigenous peoples now, feeling relationship that may have not been felt before or been as clear before. And so I hear that in the peace and dignity journeys, that this is almost an interspiritual movement among indigenous people. And I wonder if you could talk to us more about that kind of, I don't know if this is the correct terminology, is pan-indigenous movement, and how different people understand that and what you've witnessed of that.
Yeah, I definitely feel very fortunate that I'm around people of indigenous medicine from different traditions, a lot of men in ceremony together. So friends who were trained in the Dagara tradition from Burkina Faso, been around indigenous Filipino elders. In the last few years, I've been invited into the Fairy and Human Relations Congress, which is interesting because it's a lot of European Americans who have been reclaiming for many decades their indigenous medicine and talking to the land in these ways. I feel really grateful that I'm around that a lot. And I know that it's always existed, actually. It's not new that indigenous people, because of the way they walk, right? Like that Maori woman, she said, whose land are we on? I want to introduce myself. I've said that a lot to you, that like, I can't just walk off a plane and go into a meeting. I have to go make an offering at a tree. I need to sing the land, ask permission of the ancestors before I can do anything. I have to introduce myself to the land and to the ancestors of the land and ask permission to be there in a good way. So yeah, I think because it's a way of life or a way of being for most indigenous peoples, I think that's just kind of natural when you travel to other lands to be in right relationship that way, or to figure out what's the way I'm going to do that. What offering am I going to make? That part for me feels like it's been present a long time. It's probably more visible now in some ways to the outside world. So I think about that. I think about the Council of 13 Indigenous Grandmothers and some of the beautiful work they have been doing in that kind of prayer ceremony across traditions as well. I often say, how grateful I am that I've been invited to the dialogues, because it feels more like an intermystic space than an interfaith space. And I feel like inherently, when I go to these indigenous cross-shamanic kind of spaces, they feel intermystic more than they feel interfaith, right? The other piece that really stands out to me is like my teachers have talked about that too, how deep their relationship is to place and to the stewarding of that place, and then the learnings from that place and the relationship and energy of that place. But also some of my teachers have been really clear not to get fundamentalistic, be deep in your practice and your relationship. So Sergio Magana, who's my Toltec teacher, I remember when he was teaching us deep traditions, ancient traditions for clearing karmic and ancestral karma and trauma in our lives. And part of that is connecting with the universe in a particular way to ask to release some of these old ancient contracts and karma. And he said, we call it the eye of Tezcatlipoca, but please don't get fundamentalist about it. It's the same thing as the eye of Horus in this tradition or the cosmic void in that tradition. He said the mystics have very similar understandings of the universe in relation to the energy and the movement of those energies. He said, so you can't get fundamentalist about any of it. This is just the way the universe spoke through us here in this place. And so I think when you have that kind of understanding, the fundamentalism is harder to dig into because it belongs to all of humanity, right? I have been really grateful to see different people I love at various climate change events where you have indigenous Sami people from Scandinavia partnering with the indigenous peoples here of the Americas. And the issues are the same, right? Of land, of stewardship, of being allowed to live in a good way with each other and with the land and with the ancestors. So I feel very fortunate because I feel like these things have been happening a very long time, but I also think they're being given more visibility this time. The question that Maori elder asked, I think, is really important. There can be times where indigenous people are invited and it feels like a token thing, right? But they're coming to bring a piece of the puzzle that's been given to all of humanity that perhaps has been repressed. And is it open to hearing that, right? A lot of times that means, I love my friend Bayo Kamalafe says that a lot of his elders in the Yoruba tradition have said that times are urgent, we need to slow down. And so in the pace of modern living, like when indigenous people come, we're going to slow things down because you have to build relationship with each other. You have to build a relationship with the land. For me, when I meet new people and they ask me to do something, if I don't already have a relationship with them, I say indigenous people don't do anything with other people without building relationship. Can we just share story and get to know each other and see what wants to unfold through spirit that way? So I feel like there's something indigenous peoples have to teach around that balance of the being and the doing, presence with each other, but the presence with place too. And the slowing down and allowing that to unfold. There's something about the colonization that's about the control and making things happen and getting to an agenda and an outcome. And, not that those things aren't useful, but they're out of balance, right? So, yeah, I have a lot of gratitude because I do see, a lot of exchange in different spaces that give me a lot of hope around being in ceremony, being in ritual. And it's not about commodifying or taking, but exchange. Like, I think it's different in the dialogues. And also when Fetzer invited me years ago to the State of Contemplative Practice America, like people came from different traditions and led practice from their traditions and exchanged, right? There's a difference when it's an exchange in that way, where we're co-creating that space. So I do have a lot of hope around that. And I know we need more of it for sure.
That's a lovely way of putting it. I believe that's really what she was asking in the end. And now, she's a very good friend. And I think the way you put it is, can I be authentically myself in this circle, or is something expected of me? And if I'm authentically myself, then it means that the agenda may be subverted to some degree by the authenticity of the contribution. And that's part of the meeting of the eagle and the condor again. How will these things work with one another and not have the eagle define all of the behaviors and the ways of discourse? And so that was really fascinating, because that's a subtlety that isn't accounted for often in dialogue, because the dialogue has a frame and an agenda. But dialogue itself does not have an agenda except to meet and to understand and explore, which is free form. And so there's an imposition on dialogue that is not dialogue in a way.
Yeah. It's what I've found most meaningful from the dialogues, is that I feel the energy of that in that space, that energy of circle, of exchange, and even in the invitations that, like, you're not coming here as a representative of your tradition, you're coming here as a human to dialogue with others about these questions. And that's very freeing to that authenticity.
You bring up another interesting issue for us, and I think it's an issue of interspirituality. It's an issue of our humanity now. We're reckoning our displacement. We're all displaced, whether by choice or not. Not all of us, but many of us, I'm Mexican-American and not in Mexico. You're Nicaraguan-American and not in Nicaragua. And yet we have ancestral ties that are genetic roots in place and in people. There's a lovely teaching by Hazrat Inayat Khan, a Sufi master, that we all need to reclaim our inheritance. It's not automatic, but it's there. You have to do the reclamation work, but it's native to you. Whatever that inheritance is there. And so now we have this kind of dual issue. We have personal inheritance, which we have access to, but we don't necessarily know how to access. And we're on lands that are not necessarily the homelands of our ancestors, but we're here. And that land has a voice and a way it wants to be related to. And so we could talk a little bit about working with our displacement, both geographically and being displaced from our cultural inheritance.
Yeah. This is a really deep question that's up for me right now about the reclamation and the healing and the relationship with land. And it's complicated not just by the fact that both my parents were from Nicaragua originally. It's also complicated by the fact that there's a mixture in all of my grandparents of indigenous Chorotega and indigenous Nicaraguan, and what we would call colonizers, folks who came from Europe, Spanish, probably Portugal. I suspect there's other in there that we don't know about because we don't have as much information about all the lineages. So, I can remember even just when I was younger, feeling more connected to my indigenous side. Also, like, understanding as I got older that side is more rooted because it never left the place of its ancestors, and it still has some of its traditional practices. My indigenous grandmother on my mother's side is the one that most guides me, is the most, what I would call the most healthy ancestor. And she's been super supportive and on this path in some ways that I'm really grateful for. And it's interesting for me, part of the reclamation for me is my grandmother had Spanish blood and indigenous blood, but she deeply carried that indigenous knowledge in ways that I'm really grateful for and only learning about now as an adult. But she didn't have conflict around the fact that she went to Catholic church and also used traditional medicine to heal her children of things that the medical professionals said were unhealable, that they were going to die from or have all their lives. She was able to heal them through her traditional practices, which is about relationship with these universal forces. It's not about her healing them. It's about her being in right relationship with those energies and forces and allowing for the movement of those energies through that relationship. I think that I've gone through a reckoning around displacement in the sense that I think I had distance from my father's ancestors for a long time because I saw them as less healthy, less kind, a lot more trauma, a lot more unkindness and abuse in many folks in that line, not all of them, but many of them. And, and that, of course, that affected my father and the way he grew up. And though there was trauma and stuff in my mom's side, the family was intact. They didn't abandon each other. They didn't harm their siblings to get ahead. You know, it was a different form of trauma, but they were still in community with each other. And so as I've gotten older, you know, I started doing healing work with certain ancestor lines first that were perhaps a little more healthy, but still had trauma. And then doing the healing work with them is helping me to turn now towards the less healthy ancestors and start healing some of the heavy karma and trauma and sadness that led them to do some awful things. And to see them as humans. All of them are human beings with beauty and gifts and talents and divine inheritance that many of them had forgotten because of that separation from place, that separation from their spirit, their practices, their ancestors. So I do really believe we're all divine beings with divine inheritance. And we have some things to clean up energetically, karmically, in order to remember fully who we are. And also in this time of shift, in the Toltec, we're in the time of the transition from the fifth to the sixth sun. We're supposed to be stepping from the fifth sun, the time of war and separation and patriarchy and all those isms and the us versus them, whatever form that takes, looking for the answers outside. We're shifting into the time of the sixth sun right now, which is coming into our Quetzalcoatl nature, remembering that divine inheritance, that we carry gifts, that we're meant to be in partnership with the cosmos, with the earth, in order to realize those gifts and be of service in the highest way. And again, Sergio's like, don't be fundamentalist about it. This is, you know, same as Buddha consciousness, Christ consciousness, you know, unity consciousness. This is how we know it, to come back into our Quetzalcoatl state. So I do believe that this time is that for everyone. But what I've been told by those elders in the Toltec tradition is like, we have to clean up the karmic and ancestral in order for that not to cloud. If we're going to hold our staff of power and our gifts with will, with discipline, with integrity, we have to clear those patterns, right? Of holding power with oppression or being a victim or giving our power away in order to survive. Those are parts of the elements of the energies of this time that we're ending. And so I do really feel like it's an important time to be in that reckoning, not from a place of anger and judgment, although there are feelings that are going to need to be processed for sure for our ancestors. There's a lot of grief in the chest. There's a lot of anger in the hiotl and the liver area. There's a lot of unforgiveness. All those things are blocking us from our true nature. And so what does it mean to be in that reckoning of displacement? I remember this elder Makani Themba, when I was working with her many years ago as part of a collaborative, she said something that really stuck with me. She said, what would it be like to learn to be indigenous to place in this present moment, wherever we are now, even if it's not the land of our ancestors, to be in relationship with the land there, to ask permission, to talk to the native folks and to support them in some way, to learn how to be in the cycles of the elements, the seasons, the sun, the moon, again, wherever we are, to remember that relationship with all that is again, and to create from that place with the partnership and the support of those relationships in the human and the non-human world. That if we can learn to do the reckoning so we can access that inheritance, but to do so with integrity and love, you know, to clear those patterns that might want to take us in a different direction and to recreate things that are not serving us and future generations. Yeah. Because of the prophecies, I always say to people, it's both a gift and a responsibility to be alive in this particular moment in time of humanity.
There's so much that's important about the framing there, too. I like to quote a lot of the time Abram Joshua Heschel, who said with regard to the Holocaust, some are guilty, all are responsible. And we have a good understanding now of guilt with regard to colonialism and supremacy culture and many things. On the other hand, that doesn't acknowledge planetary consciousness and process. And whoever is guilty, there is an all that is responsible. And we've been spread like seed over the planet, and a planet that we know from ecological thinking that loves diversity. And when we're too isolated, we atrophy, and it actually loves diversity. And so by whatever storms and winds, we've been spread all over this planet. And that's an interesting way to deal with it now. You bring up some really great things, like from one perspective, like or enjoy to identify with my indigenous ancestors, you know, in my Mexican heritage. on the other hand, I'm still 50% Spanish, and look like it. And I have to reckon with that. I have to have this internal reckoning just as we have to have an external reckoning. And there's a reconciliation in that reckoning too. Like, it will not serve me to disown my ancestors who did problematic things. They are me, in a sense, and they loved me. They loved me into existence, and here I am. And so this is a personal process and a planetary process. And now we have this interesting necessity of having to, as you mentioned it, reconcile ourselves to place wherever we are and reestablish right relationship to place and be indigenous to place right now. And I think it's worthwhile to talk about, we've talked a little bit about we have to reestablish our indigenous internal roots. But how do we establish our right relationship to the planet where we are as if we're indigenous to this place? How do we begin that work?
Well, I think one is creating altars on the land wherever you live and making offerings there, asking permission to be there in a good way, to be a steward, to be in partnership, to be in listening, asking the land what it wants, asking the land guardians what they want. To really see it not as an ownership thing, but as a relationship thing. And of course, when we're in a relationship with someone, we share story. We want to know about who they are, and we want to make sure that not just our needs are met in that relationship, but their needs too, if it's going to be an authentic and loving relationship. So seeing wherever you are in that, trying to shift that in our own minds. And it's absolutely important to our purpose. It's so interesting to me to be in this space right now because, as I've talked to you before, the land is calling me to steward and to do healing on it. So there's the land that our women's circle was on for many years. And there was a lot of karma and heaviness that person's family had done on that land, some really painful things. And the land asked for the Toltec healing to clear some of the heaviness and burden on that land energetically before the moon circle left that space. And so a number of us did that together, and it was very heavy. And then there's the land that has been talking to me and asking me to do clearing on it because it used to be a rock quarry and it had so much trauma from being kind of torn up in that way, disrespected in that way. And so I don't own that land yet. The land said, I need you to start doing healing work on me, and we need to build a relationship before we ever get to this place, before you start the land trust. And the land is owned by the land trust and becomes a healing space. I have to heal before I can be a space of healing for others. And they said, we're training you to help other people how to get back in right relationship with the land, not just as individuals, but as communities, to be back in those ceremonies. And I've been asking, so I've been working on these 2 ancestral lineages, and there's these other grandmothers and grandfathers that I want to start working on too, who are the ones that were less healthy and perhaps more lost that way. And I asked, what's the next layer of healing that I have to do around that? And what came up was my father's grandfather stewarded a piece of land in Nicaragua and was also sharing that with other people in a good way. And when he died, his son, my grandmother's brother, did some really horrible things on that land, kicked those people off the land. It was supposed to be held for the family. He sold it off, just all these things. And what came through in a very recent session and asking about what's next, what's the next layer for me to do, they said, you have to clear the karma on that land from that ancestor because it's very heavy. And the people who live there now, who are not related to this relative, they said they're having a difficult time on that land because of the heaviness on that land. And the land that's here that you've been healing, it wants to help you heal that remotely from here. But also it doesn't want you to take stewardship of that land until you clear that karma from that ancestor, because you can't have that in you, right? That possession of land with that ancestral karma has to be cleared first before you begin the land trust, and which makes so much sense to me, right? So all of this, is about just loving up on the land, honoring that our ancestors have karma on the land that caused harm to people, that caused harm to animals, to trees, to the energy of that place. And what does it mean to get curious about that and start to make amends through ceremony, through offerings, through energetic clearing, And how do we do that individually? How do we do that as a community to be in that right relationship? And it starts with that very simple thing of just introducing myself to this place, introducing myself to the ancestors of this place. I want to be here in a good way. I ask permission to be here in a good way, to be of service while I'm here, and to be open to the messages that come through. It's just like any other thing, right? If you go into somebody's house and you just start taking things without introducing yourself, that's theft, right? And what does it mean to go into a place and say, hey, I want to be in right relationship. I want to listen. I want to give and receive, like to be thankful for all that Mother Earth gives us, right? If you have a garden in your backyard, before you plant things, make an offering to the land. Like I sing to the land, I make an offering, sometimes of rose water, sometimes of cedar or tobacco. It doesn't have to be one way. The land cares more that we come with an earnestness of humility and respect and honoring than she does what the specific thing is, right? So being in that listening of like, what is my way of introducing and making offerings and being in gratitude to the land again and not taking it for granted.
If you're enjoying the episode, please consider subscribing to our Patreon to help support the production of the podcast.
Subscriptions begin at $1. All patrons receive access to bonus content, curated resources, and exclusive patron events, including live Q&As.
For more information, please check out the Patreon link in the show notes, and thanks for listening. Picking up these two overarching themes of connections between different indigenous peoples and a certain kind of coming together, as well as the sense of healing and reckoning, I'm curious if you can speak a little bit to Standing Rock, if you had any experience being involved in that, because it seems like Standing Rock was an example of both of these things, both of a coming together and a certain kind of reckoning. And I remember during that time also hearing connections to various kinds of prophecies about this kind of coming together.
Yes, that was a very profound experience for me. I remember there was a call that came out for spiritual leaders to come to Standing Rock for a particular time. And over 500 people showed up. They were not expecting that many. And Spirit told me, you have to go, you have to go, you have to go. And I was like, I don't know how I'm going to get there, but, my community helped me get there. And I did carry, donations that people who weren't able to come gave me to bring there. So I'm grateful for that. It was a profound experience for me, sleeping in the tent, waking up every morning, the people gathering in the dark around the fire for fire ceremony, for song, for offerings to the fire, the women leading water ceremony after that. And then always there being a fire ceremony at night too. And so I felt the sacredness of people coming together in ceremony around the land. And then going off during the day, some people were in the medic tent, some people were training people for direct action. Everybody was, offering what they could there. They said, if you're coming, you come here to be of service in some way. But there was a real gift around that. There's some profound experiences I had. I remember on the morning that we had the walk of all the spiritual leaders that came from all these different traditions, many of them different Christian traditions. I remember at the sacred fire, some of the elders saying that they were incredibly sorry about the heaviness of the Doctrine of Discovery and all that happened because of the Doctrine of Discovery and the sanctioning of the church of land theft and genocide and all these things. And they had gone to the trouble of making a photocopy of the entire Doctrine of Discovery, the original one, and asking permission to burn it at the sacred fire. And I can't tell you what, the ancestral thing in me when I felt them say those words was really powerful. And I remember the elders saying, this sacred fire is our prayers up to our ancestors, so you can't burn it in this fire, because that's not a prayer we have, right? But we welcome you to burn it off to the side. And that was a very profound thing for me to experience that. And I could feel my ancestors, and probably others did too, like the importance of the significance of things like that. I do remember a friend telling me who was also there, that when she was leaving, several young people who were leaving were very emotional and sad and crying. And she asked what that was about. And they said, we don't want to go home. Because here there's this way of there's a role for the men, there's a role for the women, there's a role for the youth. Everyone is giving. We're in ceremony together every sunrise, every sunset. We're offering to the water. And I don't want to go home and go back to not being connected this way. And so that was a very profound sharing that she gave me, because I think that one of the things they said was like, we've been activists for social justice and we're young and these things are important to us, but this is the first time we felt the embodiment of it, the experience of it. There's the intellectual understanding of it, and there's the embodiment in an intergenerational way, in a way with the land that we have not experienced until we came here. And I know the land that's calling me said, people need to have that kind of experience on the land when you open that to the community. It'll be like Standing Rock, except that you'll have mystic elders from all colors of the medicine wheel teaching and leading ceremony there together, because people need to have that experience of returning to that knowing, that belonging to each other and to the land in a profound way. You can talk about it intellectually, but until people experience it, it's very hard for them to even imagine what that might be like.
Yeah, thank you.
I'm thinking about the symbolism of the burning of the copy of the Doctrine of Discovery. And in some ways, it suggests that they're saying, we're going to remove this from our hearts. And how that strikes me is we're all where we are now, standing on the land on which we're standing. And we don't necessarily have the capacity to go back anywhere where we came from. Resources, money, language, we're cut off from, all kinds of things. There's no going back. But we don't have to have the doctrine of discovery in our hearts while we're here. And in some ways, that needs to be expunged or removed from our hearts, the sense of entitlement to this place, and that's really what that is. That it's a justification or entitlement. But we also have to reckon that we're here. We are where we are and can't necessarily not be here. We can deal with how we're here, in what manner we're here and on this land, and how we deal with the land. And that's very interesting to me and seems very important. We can't right the wrongs of the past. We can restore relationship, I think. So we've been talking about how to restore relationship to the land, but then we have this other trajectory or line of development that we can't necessarily undo. We might be undone from it, but we can't necessarily undo it. And that's around technology and even our homes, like being very vulnerable to the elements, as human beings on the planet. And with a certain kind of capacity, we created very clever protections from the environment. And there are lots of benefits for that. Longer life, the ability to have some leisure to create art, to create technologies, to abstract in our thinking and explore instead of always having to live right on the edge. It did things for us, but it also has clearly protected us right out of relationship with the planet. And yet we sit in these boxes right now. And I wonder, just as we're talking about restoring relationship to the land, is there a way to be in these boxes that is different? Is there a way to be in a house that is in more right relationship to the planet as a whole so that it doesn't protect us out of relationship with the planet? I don't know if you've given thought to that. I'm wondering that now.
I'm so glad you brought that up. I know when I was first married to Rick many, many years ago, he was really gung-ho about buying a house. And there was something in me that was really averse to even the idea of buying a house. And I think so much of it was that indigenous sensibility of you don't own land, you're in relationship to land, you steward land. But thankfully, got over that hump. And that's what I feel like. The land here, the guardians of this land, the animals of this land, the trees of this land, I'm in deep relationship with all of them. And they asked me for things, they asked me for altars in the front to Coatlicue as life and death, to make a fairy garden. There's a particular tree that we have a deep relationship with that has asked, for the fairy garden at the base, for a bird feeder, for wind chime, for prayer flags. There's trees in the back that give me advice when I'm struggling with things. There's requests for altars inside and outside the house of particular natures and things that they want. And so I do think there's a way that we can learn to be in that listening wherever we are, whether we're a renter or whether we're a quote unquote owner, which still I can't handle that frame. But anyway, but I understand now that Rick and I have that title so that we can hold it in a way that's about relationship and stewardship and not domination and oppression, right? There's so many things that have happened here when the land has asked us for specific things that sometimes weren't convenient for us. But it was about that relationship, right? And, even with the ants, a lot of times, not always, but a lot of times when ants start coming in, I'll say, look, I really don't want to kill you. Let me place some water for you outside. We can coexist on this place. But, if a bunch of you come in, and I can feel the colonizer in me, right? It helps me to have some understanding for how easy it is to cross that line of disrespect to other life, dehumanization of other life, right? Why do I have more right to be here than that ant, right? And can I soften the way I am on this earth in a way that coexists instead of domination? And the land has been teaching me. It really has been teaching me how to listen more and to be in right relationship. So yes, we have the title to this property, and my primary role is steward, not owner. And I'm always in that curiosity about what does that look like? And I have these incredible stories that I can share about my relationship with the tree out front and how we've gotten to this place over the years, right? The deep teachings of what it means to be in right relationship that way in a box, right? And to cultivate and nourish those relationships.
Might you be willing to share a little story about the specific tree and your relationship with the tree?
Yes, I would love to. So there's a pluot tree in the front of our home who has given us beautiful fruit over the years, really juicy and wonderful. And it's one of our favorite trees. It also provides a lot of shade to the house, a lot of nesting for the birds. So it feels like a very core being in the front of the house. Some years ago, my husband noticed that the toilet kept clogging up and he would, do what he needed to do, but it would clog back up again. So he had a plumber come out and do one of those camera snakes down at the pipe outside in front of the house. And we realized that the pluot's roots had completely destroyed the pipe from the house to the street. And that's why it kept getting clogged up right there. So with a very matter-of-fact way, the plumber told my husband, you're going to have to cut that tree down. You can't keep that tree. It's going to keep doing that. And he's like, I can use the little tool to clear the pipe right now, but it's just going to grow back. So, but you both have to replace the pipe, but you also have to get rid of that tree. This is going to be a recurring problem. And I married the husband I married for a reason. He loves the earth and the trees as much as I do, which is why I adore him. And he's known that several people in the past have asked me to do kind of blessing ceremonies when trees had to be cut down to honor their relationship, their memories, all that they've given us. So he said, we have to cut it down, Brenda. We have to cut it down. And I know that you don't want to, and I don't want to, and I love that tree too. And can we do a ceremony for it? We had roses and smudging it. We were telling all these stories about all the things we were grateful for, all the memories we had with it. We're both crying throughout the whole ceremony, but it was our way of saying goodbye in a place of gratitude and acknowledgement of that sacred life. And so he's really grateful when we did that ceremony. He said, okay, we're going to have to cut it down. I'm going to replace the pipe first, but we're going to have to cut it down later. But thank you for doing that before we do that. And so sometime later, he's at Home Depot buying the clay pipe to replace that standard pipe that was destroyed by the tree. And he realized that they had, I think they were steel or iron pipes that were far more expensive, but would probably last a little longer against the roots of this tree. So he came home really happy and really excited. And he said, I bought this other pipe, which really we can't afford, but I bought it anyway. And I don't want to cut down the tree. Like that ceremony that we did made me feel like so connected to the tree, and I don't want to cut it down. He said, the tree will probably get through this pipe too at some point. It's just will take it a lot longer. He said, but let's not cut it down. He's like, I will have to clear all the roots in the area where I'm placing the new pipe, so it will cause damage to the tree, but at least we're not killing it and taking it down. And I just hugged him so hard. And I said, I love you. This is why I'm married to you. I love you. I love you. I love you. I'm so happy we don't have to cut it down. And then, of course, the tree for a couple of years after that was a little weak. It didn't give fruit because it was recovering from the injury of some of those roots being removed. But I remember at the very beginning of the pandemic, when I was suddenly home a lot more and not traveling so much, the tree started talking to me a lot. I said, "Oh, good. I'm glad that you're home more. I have some things to tell you." And it said, "I'm really grateful that you didn't chop me down. I know that that was the plan, and it means a lot to me that you and Rick didn't cut me down. And I'm starting to feel better, and I'm probably going to start giving fruit again soon." And it did that year. And it said, "Now that we're in conversation and you're home more, I have some requests of you." And this is the tree that said, "I want a fairy garden at my base. I want prayer flags on me. I want a bird feeder, and I want a wind chime." And I was like, wow, that's very specific. So I went and got all those things for it. It's the happiest tree right now. And it's also become a really interesting connector to many neighbors, because the neighbors, especially with little kids, keep stopping and talking to me about the fairy garden and the prayer flags. So it's created some connection in the community that's really powerful. And I feel like there's this mutual love and recognition between not just me and the tree, which has been there a long time, but now it's really feels that from my husband too. Yeah, so there's a lot about that place. And I remember also at the beginning of the pandemic, they said, "You're going to have to clear space to see people here who have lost their relatives during the pandemic. This place, because of the front, if you come to the front of my house, the back is more like a typical garden and there's planter boxes and stuff. The front looks more like a little wild forest. It's small, but there's like a lot of trees. There's no grass. Possums, raccoons, birds, they love living there. You know, we put water out for them and the bird feeders out for them. But they said this is a more sacred, feminine, wild space. So it's a more liminal space where you can access the spirit world. And I remember a friend's brother died and she was really distraught. And she came and she said, "I can feel him here talking to me." And so there's something about the front that is about that mystic, sacred, feminine rewilding that the land wants up there. It's like they said, it's fine that you have it all manicured in the back with the planter boxes and all irrigated, but this must remain wild always.
You said something before Daniel asked you to talk about the tree in relationship to me asking about our houses. And you said the word dehumanization, but you said dehumanization of other life. And, somebody could say, well, that's inaccurate. How can you dehumanize a non-human?
Yeah, I think that's the word that people understand. So that's why I use it.
But I think it's right.
Yeah, because there's a reason why Indigenous people say all my relations. All my relations is not just my relatives or not other humans. It's my relationship to the tree kingdom, to the fungi kingdom, to the birds, to the guardians of that land. It's also physical and non-physical realm, right? Because there's spirit beings as well as physical beings. But start with the physical beings, because that's what most people can relate to first. But yeah, there's something about the othering, right? I love the Othering and Belonging Institute because that language is so clear. How we other people, but how we other the tree, how we other the ant, how we other the bird, how we other everything, right? In order to be in dominion.
Exactly. And then that's why I think it's actually a very appropriate word for us to use, to not want to dehumanize the other beings of our environment. Because how do we know what to value? I mean, one, it's hard enough for us to be human and to understand how important that is and what that is in its depth, as opposed to what we're ordinarily doing, kind of non-humaning, dehumanizing ourselves, unhuman behavior. But human is actually our ideal, and it's how we know how to relate. And, it's very clear in other periods of human existence, we didn't other so much, that we were in relationship. Everything was speaking to us. The walls, the wind, everything was speaking to us. And we were having a human relationship to it as if, I love this little story about Carl Jung returning to his tower. He had built a tower, and it was kind of his place of retreat. And he hadn't been there for a long time. He'd been traveling, giving talks. And he came back and he went to make himself a meal, and pans are falling off their hooks and hitting the table, and they're almost hitting his foot. He drops a knife, and, like 10 things happen. And he withdraws to the center of the room, says, "All right, everyone, I'm sorry. I know I've been gone a long time, and I'm back. I missed you. I'm registering your complaint." And he meant it because he had a private theory that matter was conscious and that it cooperated with our unconscious to create effects that would be meaningful for us and would communicate messages to us. And he really believed this. And so he realized he had been out of relationship and there were complaints. And I think that this is part of the answer to that question. We have to humanize our environment. The mic into which we're speaking, the computer in front of us, the desk upon which I'm leaning, we have to humanize it in a way and be in relationship to it. How do we treat it? Would we treat it as, the hand of the beloved, to use Sufi language? When we move an object, are we moving it as if it's, not an object, but a beloved, a friend? And I think there's a lot of answer to that. So that this dehumanizing, it actually turns out, I think, to be actually the correct word. And it's the incorrect mind that tells us, well, that's not human. That's a non-human, Yeah.
And the thing that I love about all of this is it may sound hard or weird or different to begin doing that. But when you begin doing that, the sense of belonging you have everywhere you go is the most beautiful thing you can possibly imagine. I never feel not at home, whether I'm here or somewhere else. I feel like I'm amongst all my relations all the time. And it's the biggest wealth that you could ever have that money could never give you. And I feel held by so much bigger than me because of that. And people say that when they walk into my backyard for healing sessions. They're like, whoa. The energy in this backyard is so different. And it's like, well, that's because I'm maintaining and cultivating my relationship with all the beings here, the elements, the earth, making offerings. I'm changing the flowers on the altar. It's not something I'm doing for aesthetics. Although the aesthetics are nice, it is really about energy and relationship. Like it is really about wanting to be in right relationship with all my relations. And when I am, they do so much to help me and support me. Like I'm not healing anybody. It's my relationship with all these energies that make the movement of the heavy karma and family trauma possible. Like if I'm not a right relationship with them, they're not going to help me move that energy. So in being in relationship with all of it, everything is possible. But when I'm trying to do everything as Brenda the human, very little is possible in comparison because I'm not doing it with all these relationships. So yeah, it's for me, it's less about giving up power, which I think the othering is in that story, and much more about remembering my belonging. And that when I cultivate my relationships in a good way, so much is available to me. And I want that for everyone, that remembering and that relationship. But we've been trained away for it for so long.
Yeah, thank you. It's such a strong reflection for myself just to think of maybe the ways in which I'm in that spiritual poverty of relationship with my surroundings. When was the last time I touched in with the brick and the inanimate objects? I guess I tend to think of it more amongst living life, quote unquote living life, right? The plants or the birds.
Yeah, I think about the stone people a lot because since from a young age, I've been connected to the stone people. So we don't talk about them as stones, as objects, but it's a stone family. Everything is a kingdom or a family. And they're said to be holders of ancient wisdom and knowledge and the story keepers, the memory keepers. But I tell people all the time, I have all these beautiful stones on my altar, and some of them came to me because I purchased them. Some of them have been gifted to me. And each one of them, I don't think of as something I own. And I say that when I go to shops where there's crystals, I'm like, who's coming home with me? When I go buy roses to do a rose healing, I ask who's coming with me. And they tell me who's coming. And when I travel, I said, who's coming for the travel altar? And it's different every time. So there have been stones like on that Peace and Dignity journey. So I had this peacock stone that I had loved and what had for years, and it traveled with me. And I remember on the Peace and Dignity journeys, that young man who was the leader of the Condor route was going back home to Colombia. And the stone said to me, my work with you is done. You have to gift me to him. I have to work with him now. And I was like, oh, I'm really going to miss you. And thank you. I've loved all the time we've had together. So even something that is inanimate or not alive in the human world, right? I think of as a sentient being who has its own agency. And a lot of indigenous peoples talk about how we're the youngest relatives. And we have a lot to learn from the other kingdoms, that they're like so patient with us as little toddlers figuring our way. And so that part of that belonging and listening is about them being able to teach us what they know about how to be in better relationship.
I love this image of humanity as an incredibly smart but misbehaving little toddler.
Yep. I think of us as teenagers, actually. I think we're in the teenager needing to go to the rite of passage to young adult from a consciousness perspective.
Yes, there's definitely a kind of human arrogance that seems very akin to an adolescent phase. But it's just been so lovely sharing this dialogue with you. And I'm wondering if to close us out, you can share a poem or a prayer or song or anything of that vein. For me, I'm just really reflecting on the theme that we started with this little story that I was remembering. And it feels like so much that's been a theme and a through line through our conversation, and really an unpacking of what it means to be in right relationship and sacred relationship. So I just want to thank you personally. And I think our listeners will also be inspired to, at the very least, hold some of these questions for digestion and maybe have an opportunity to reflect.
Well, I think two things. One is a poem that I'll close with, but I think the first thing before that is an invitation to anyone who's listening to this to go outside and to try and connect with something non-human. Could be a tree, could be a bird, could be a blade of grass, could be a stone. Take some time to just really be present with it, to breathe slowly and deeply and ask it what it wants you to know. Introduce yourself to it and ask it what it wants you to know. Treat it as if you were meeting someone for the first time. Like if we were going to an event and I was meeting you for the first time and say, hi, my name is Brenda. What's your name? Here's the people and the lands that I come from. Tell me a little bit about yourself. Like we do that with other people we're meeting for the first time. So I'm asking you to go out at some point in the very near future and to introduce yourself to something non-human and be curious about what it wants you to know. So that's the first thing, the invitation. And then the second thing is a poem from Joy Harjo. This is from a book called The Path of Kindness, Poems of Connection and Joy. And one of the poems in there is by Joy Harjo, and it's called For Keeps. Sun makes the day new. Tiny green plants emerge from earth. Birds are seeing the sky into place. There is nowhere else I want to be but here. I lean into the rhythm of your heart to see where it will take us. We gallop into a warm southern wind. I link my legs to yours and we ride together toward the ancient encampment of our relatives. Where have you been, they ask, and what has taken you so long? That night, after eating, singing, and dancing, we lay together under the stars. We know ourselves to be part of the mystery. It is unspeakable. It is everlasting. It is for keeps.
Beautiful. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Shout out to friend of the show, Treefort of Golden Turtle Sound, for producing the intro and outro music and assisting with mixing and mastering. Be sure to check out his awesome music and hit up Golden Turtle Sound for any of your audio engineering needs.